r/explainlikeimfive. G3 Nerala Curious says, explain like I'm5 what happens to excess electricity produced on the grid. Since, and unless electricity has properties I'm not aware of, it's not possible for electric power plants to produce only and exactly the amount of electricity being drawn at a given time, and not having enough electricity for everyone is a very bad thing. I'm assuming the power plants produce enough electricity to meet a predicted average need plus a little extra margin. So, if this understanding is correct, where does that little extra margin go? And what kind of margin are we talking about? FireLNPO says, there really isn't excess electricity. Not yet anyway, and probably not ever in any large scale. Dioscurry says, we place it into batteries. Most of the ones we use are simple capacitors. This is also where we receive the electricity from when the draw is greater than the production. We maintain a current in these capacitors and maintain a fair margin of error so we can bring production online and drop production as needed without issues. Bringing a plant online is a long process, and some plants can't stop generating power without damaging the plant, so we keep those running all the time and power up, and drop off others as necessary. Discussion Growoy 322 says, Tesla coil toes Apple the naughty kids that ask nosy questions like these. Now go away, you're standing in front of the TV. Lem finish my game. CMG30 says, there's a little bounce in the lines. If you put too much in, then things like voltage start to rise. If things get too out of hand, the grid will short its to ground. r/explainlikeimfive. Biceps Hidden says, explain like I'm5, why does heart rate go up throughout a run, even though you keep the same pace? I've noticed that my heart rate goes up towards the end of a race, even though I'm running at the same pace throughout the entire race. Why is that? For instance, I had a run at a pace of 550 minimum/km, and at the end of the run I had to run at 7 o'clock minimum/km to keep the same heart rate. Eric Orm says, it happen if you pass your aerobic threshold. If you stay below it, your heartbeat will be more steady. If you go above it, it will keep climbing. Back with the Vengeance says, oh my wheelhouse, kinesiology grad here. Essentially it has to do with two things, duration and intensity. The longer you run, the more you are burning through your energy stores. I can get into the shift from glucose, fat for ATP production for energy, but I won't. So the longer you run at the same pace, the more your energy stores deplete, and the more you're burning to produce the same output. Muscular contraction, how intense the run is, this depends on a lot of things. If you're running on a track, it's flat, there's no undulations or hills, and then it all depends on how hard or fast you're running. Same principle applies. The harder you run, the more energy you're burning quickly, and your heart needs to keep up to push blood throughout your body, not only for O2, but for nutrients that feed the muscles to cause contraction. So, anytime you hit an uphill and have to push harder to keep pace, your heart is going to work harder, and there is a refractory period once you get back on flat ground to get back to steady state. Thanks for letting me nerd out for a second. r/explainlikeimfive. Tyler Koo says, explain like I'm5, how does engine braking work if the manifold vacuum is equally applied to all cylinders? Jake brakes are trivial to understand. You're compressing a spring and magically losing that energy instead of allowing it to be returned. But I don't get how gasoline engine brakes work. From what I can tell, the manifold holds a vacuum which resists the piston downstroke, but the vacuum returns the same energy in the piston's upstroke, minus friction, which is negligible. Furthermore, once all cylinders have undergone one full cycle, they all hold a vacuum, so if one cylinder is being retarded, its opposite is being actuated, meaning the force balance is pretty close to neutral. So where's the energy loss here? Cynic Jesus says, Jake brakes are mechanically blocking a port to create vacuum, Engine braking in a normal car is simply the engine compressing air on one of every 4 strokes each piston, but not doing anything with it. That's why Jake brakes exist, because while engine braking will slow down a heavy truck, it's not enough drag to prevent acceleration on its own, even in a diesel, which has incredibly high compression. Daffiflia says, with the throttle closed, intake stroke costs energy, sucking against vacuum, forcing air past closed throttle, compression stroke costs energy, compressing air, power stroke returns most of that compression energy, compressed air pushes piston, exhaust stroke costs energy, pushing air out of cylinder and through exhaust. On top of all that you've got engine friction, that's just straight up wasted energy too. So the net balance of all that is that you're spending a lot of energy moving air around and overcoming mechanical friction and only reclaiming a little of it. In cars that do cylinder deactivation, you keep all the valves closed, so it's just exhaust stroke compresses air, costs energy, intake stroke and compress air, reclaims most of that energy, compression stroke compresses air, costs energy, power stroke and compress air, reclaims most of that energy. So then yeah, you've just made a spring. You're still losing energy to friction etc, but not to inhaling or exhaling air into the cylinder. I would assume you're also losing a tiny bit of that compression pressure past the piston rings too. In diesels doing compression braking, it's intake stroke sucks air in, costs energy, compression stroke compresses air, costs energy, exhaust valve opens at the end of compression, stays open during entire power stroke, compressed air noisily blows out of cylinder, wasting its energy, exhaust valve remains open during exhaust stroke, costs energy. A big reason this system exists is because diesels don't have a throttle, so if you didn't do this, you wouldn't get much engine braking on deceleration, as there isn't the energy lost to pulling air through a closed throttle. MacPhail says, the energy loss is occurring at the throttle body / throttle plate. Fundamentally, an automobile engine is a pump that moves air from the intake manifold to the exhaust manifold. When you engine brake, you close the throttle, and as a result more work is required to pull air through the closed throttle. r/explainlikeimfive. The Messy Tipple says, explain like I'm 5. Why do opioids cause users to be constipated? PV2 Smurf says, opioids act on a receptor called mu. The opioid attaches to the brain mu receptor to exhibit its pain relieving function. Well, guess what else has a mu receptor? Yup, your stomach. Acting on it will slow down the stomach functions, causing constipation. Glacial Till says, opioids are depressants. They make you sleepy and slow you down. They do this to your stomach too, so your system is slower to clear itself out. That means constipation as well as Kurt Cobain's constant stomach problems. Suppisprettigad says, your intestines are made out of muscles which push the food along to finish digesting it. These muscles get sleepy like the rest of you when you take opioids. They're being told it's time to chill, not work. Nalacola says, there are opioid receptors in different parts of your body, and your intestines are full of them. In particular, they are called mu-opioid receptors, contrasted with delta and kappa types, which help to regulate muscle tone in the gut. A lot of anti-diarrhea meds target this, and are in fact non-intoxicating opioids. Victor Maibakrazi says, the body has a mechanism that says how fast stuff should be flowing through the gut. Normally things slow down and speed up as needed, kind of like pressing the gas and brake pedals in a car. Opiates affect this process so that your body is pressing on the brakes all the time. This results in things moving much slower than they should. The result of this is very hard stool that the body has a hard time moving, even if you take something that presses the gas pedal. r/explainlikeimfive. Neuron Addict says, explain like I'm 5. Why is silicon such a prevalent element in electronics? I study engineering, and when learning about all types of electronics, I always hear about silicon being used. What's so special about it? Additionally, I just read about a new particle accelerator which is the size of a penny, which also uses a silicon channel to accelerate the particle. What's so special about silicon? Thanks in advance. Archanglius says, all solid materials have crystal structures internally. Depending on the shape of those structures, electrons can move through them at different rates. This is why only a few metals are good conductors and basically everything else has the wrong crystal structures to allow electrons to pass through. Silicon is a semiconductor, which means it's relatively easy to make silicon from crystal structures that will either allow electrons to pass really easily or not want to pass through at all. The electrical conductivity of a semiconductor can also be affected by external factors after it has been manufactured. Silicon is not magnetic, has much lower thermal conductive and much less reactive than many of the natural conductors. It is also extremely common. Target 880 says, silicon is a semiconductor, that means its electric conductivity can be changed but doping it. Doping is introducing impurities of other element in the crystal structure. By doing that you can manage electrical components like transistor, where one electric signal can control the flow of another. Silicon is not the only semiconductor. The first transistor was made with germanium, and it was for a long time dominant. Different material have different advantages and disadvantages. Silicon has the advantages is very common, the second most common element in Earth's crust. It do not degrade a lot with high temperature, can handle a larger temperature range and higher voltages. The germanium, the disadvantage is the electron mobility is lower, so slower component and smaller frequency range. It allows user more power essentially from the constant current leakage. The result is silicon good enough performance, lower cost and better temperature handling make it the. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.